Why has a land barely larger than New Jersey been the focus of so much strife and historical conflict? Greetings everyone. Today, we're going to dissect the roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, tracing back 4,000 years to the era of Abraham. This isn't just history, it's the backstory of today's headlines. If you find this video interesting, please support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. To understand the Palestinian issue, we must first know about three religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Let me first talk about these three religions. About 4,000 years ago, the ancestors of today's Jews lived in an area called Ur near the Persian Gulf. In the Old Testament, Abraham is called by God to journey to Canaan. Canaan is present-day Palestine, and Abraham, hearing this voice, led the Jews living in Ur, and many Jews moved to the land of Palestine. During the 17th century BC, the Jewish settlers in Palestine faced a severe famine, prompting their migration to Egypt. As a result, many Jews migrated to Egypt. But of course, in Egypt, there were cities and so on. Centering on the pharaoh, and Jews who moved to Egypt were treated as slaves for the construction of those cities and so on. Consequently, Jews were enslaved in Egypt for approximately 400 years. But then, a savior appeared. That is Moses. There is a famous story that Moses made a way out of Egypt with a large number of Jews in tow, and during this escape, Moses split the sea in two to make a road. Later, around 1000 BC, the Jews created a state called the Kingdom of Israel in the land of Palestine. However, after a few hundred years, the kingdom was divided into north and south. After the division, the northern state was destroyed by the Assyrian state, and the southern state was defeated by the new Babylonian state, and a large number of Jews were taken to Babylon as prisoners of war. This is called the Babylonian Captivity. Later, when New Babylonia was destroyed, the Jews returned to Palestine. However, Palestine was then ruled by Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Syria, and the Roman Empire. Thus, the Jews were ruled by a foreign power for several hundred years. Gradually, the Jews began to think, why is God not helping us when we are suffering so much? Surely because we are not properly following the rules given by God? And they began to live under very strict rules, strictly interpreting the legislation written in the Old Testament. Contrary to these thoughts, Jesus Christ, born into Judaism, taught a message that prioritized compassion and God's love over rigid legalism. Jesus, emerging from within Judaism, preached a message that emphasized compassion and the love of God, challenging the prevailing strict interpretations of Jewish law. This was the beginning of Christianity. Jesus' reinterpretation of Jewish teachings was seen as a challenge by the religious authorities, leading to accusations of blasphemy and his eventual crucifixion. This event sowed the seeds of resentment among Christians towards Jews, who were unfairly blamed for the death of Jesus. At that time, Palestine was ruled by Rome, and the Jews revolted against this Roman rule twice, in 66 and 132 AD. Facing the might of the Roman Empire, the most powerful state of the era, the Jewish revolts were ultimately unsuccessful and led to their defeat. After these battles, Jews were prohibited from entering Jerusalem. Many were taken as slaves to Rome, and they dispersed from Palestine across the Roman Empire in the Middle East. This was the beginning of the long diaspora of the Jewish people. After this, the Jewish people could not have a Jewish state until the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. And they would continue to live in persecution and wandering for about 1,900 years. In 610, in Mecca on the Arabian Peninsula, Muhammad began to preach the revelations he reported receiving from God, known in Arabic as Allah, which laid the foundations for the religion of Islam. The power of Islam expanded rapidly, and most of the Middle East region came under Islamic rule. Palestine was also occupied by Islamic forces. Let me explain a little about Jerusalem, which is one of the main points of contention in the Palestinian issue. Jerusalem is a city in the Palestinian territories. The city is a holy site for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For Judaism, it is the site where the temple once stood. For Christianity, It is the place where Jesus was crucified and executed, and for Islam, it is the place where Muhammad is said to have ascended to heaven. Because of these circumstances, Jerusalem is considered the Holy Land of the three religions. And historically, there have been many conflicts over the land. In the 11th century, there was a conflict between Christianity and Islam over Jerusalem. Originally, Jerusalem was occupied by the Eastern Roman Empire, a Christian state, but it was taken by the Muslim power that kept expanding its influence. The Eastern Roman Emperor felt threatened by this and asked the Pope for help. The Pope, viewing Muslim control over Jerusalem as a threat to Christian holy sites, initiated the Crusades to reclaim the city for Christianity. This army is called the Crusaders. Despite numerous battles, the Crusaders ultimately failed to secure Jerusalem permanently. The Crusades saw a rise in anti-Semitic sentiment within the Christian world, with animosity aimed at both Jews and Muslims. Jews faced increasing discrimination, were segregated into ghettos, and were sometimes unjustly condemned to death. At this time, Jews were also restricted in their occupations, and Jews were often relegated to the financial sector, a field viewed disdainfully within Christian society. At that time, the significance of the financial sector was not widely recognized, and the subsequent wealth acquired by Jews involved in finance surprised both Christian and Jewish communities. After the Crusades were over, the world would go through the Age of Discovery and other periods of development. Later, when the Industrial Revolution took place in England, a large amount of money was demanded, and the Jews, who were in the financial business, acquired a large amount of wealth at once. After that, Jews who were able to go to universities studied hard and became very successful in all fields. Gradually, this success bred envy, leading to a resurgence of anti-Semitism. Then, in 1894, an incident occurred that made Jews despair. It was the Dreyfus affair. The Jewish French officer Dreyfus was wrongfully convicted of espionage in a trial marred by anti-Semitism, leading to his imprisonment and later exoneration, which highlighted the anti-Semitic sentiments in France at the time. However, it was later discovered that the charges were fabricated by anti-Semites. After this incident, many Jews felt that, even with the Declaration of Human Rights, they were not immune to discrimination. The only way to live peacefully without discrimination is to create our own state. A movement was then born to build a state by Jews for Jews in Palestine, the homeland of the Jewish people. This is called the Zionist movement. In the 20th century, Jews began to settle in Palestine in earnest. However, of course, Palestine at this time had a large number of Muslim Arabs living there, and there would be future conflicts between Jews who wanted to establish a state in Palestine, their homeland, and Arabs who were already living in Palestine. Later, after World War II, the fact that Jews were massacred in large numbers became known throughout the world, and international public opinion changed to the idea that Jews should be given a Jewish state. In addition, since there were approximately 4.5 million Jews living in the U.S. at that time, many of whom were of high social standing, the U.S. could not politically ignore it. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a plan for the partition of Palestine. The partition plan allocated 56% of Palestinian land to the Jewish state, reducing the territory under Arab control by the same proportion. The following year, Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Zionist group, proclaimed the establishment of the Jewish State of Israel. As soon as the State of Israel was proclaimed, U.S. President Harry S. Truman recognized Israel as a state. The Arab population, facing the sudden loss of more than half of their territory, could not accept the partition. The Arab states, rejecting the partition, engaged in a series of conflicts with the new State of Israel, which resulted in territorial gains for Israel. Egypt, which had failed to defeat Israel in the four wars, reached an agreement through U.S. mediation that Egypt would recognize Israel as a state, that Israel would return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt in exchange for diplomatic relations, and that Palestine would have administrative control over the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. This agreement fell short of the expectations of the Arab community, who once held the entirety of Palestine. as they were granted only limited administrative autonomy over a fraction of the land. In 1987, a traffic accident involving an Israeli army truck in the Gaza Strip, which resulted in the deaths of 4 Palestinians, incited a young Palestinian to express his outrage through the symbolic act of throwing stones at Israeli soldiers. In response, the Israeli army killed the young man. This incident triggered a protest movement, in which Palestinian children and youths threw stones at Israeli soldiers. This protest movement is called the Intifada. The Israeli military's response to the protests involved attempts to quell the unrest, frequently resorting to forceful measures and widespread detentions. However, images of Israeli soldiers violently treating children and young people were broadcast around the world, and international public opinion became sympathetic to Palestine. And here Arafat, chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, an armed organization that seeks the liberation of Palestine by Arabs, declared at the United Nations, "We hereby officially declare that we recognize the existence of Israel and renounce any future acts of terrorism." After this declaration, an agreement is reached in Oslo, Norway, between Israeli Prime Minister Rabin and Arafat of the PLO. This Oslo Accord and the subsequent agreements granted Palestinians administrative autonomy in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And it was decided that other issues would be resolved through future discussions. Barak, who subsequently became Israel's prime minister, was eager to make peace with Palestine and expressed his intention to return all of the Gaza Strip and 92% of the West Bank to Palestine, and to recognize the partitioning of the Old City of Jerusalem. However, Barak's peace plan was not accepted in Israel and was aborted, resulting in severe criticism. Later, Sharon, who opposed peace, became prime minister. In response to Sharon's hostile attitude toward Palestine, the militant Hamas and other militant groups committed more acts of terrorism against Israel. In response to ongoing attacks, Sharon initiated the construction of a barrier in the West Bank aimed at preventing further incursions into Israel. International public opinion was critical of Israel's construction of the wall, viewing it as a harsh measure. To calm international opinion, Sharon announced in 2004 that he would return the Gaza Strip to Palestine. And the following year he withdrew his troops and transferred the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority. This was supposed to be the first step toward peace between Israel and Palestine, but the reality was to go the exact opposite way. The withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip was interpreted by some Palestinians as a victory for their resistance, contributing to the rise in support for Hamas, which then took control of the area. This development further intensified the militant stance of some Palestinian groups. Israel persisted in erecting a barrier with the intention of preventing attacks from the Gaza Strip. Despite the construction of the wall, Hamas, the ruling authority in Gaza, continued to launch rocket attacks on Israel. In 2008, extensive airstrikes by Israel in response to rocket fire resulted in significant casualties, including civilians. Since then, there have been frequent clashes between Israel and Hamas, which have now developed into a state of war. As we have seen, the Palestinian issue is intertwined with a long history, religion, and politics, and is very difficult to resolve. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye.